Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom, all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashim, Yahushai, Ba'ashim, Makakadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Stone for teachers of truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquathim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Okwai. I can here with another quick and Lord's will as always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of just wanted to go through three examples of men, within the scriptures who had more than one wife, right? And this concept is also known as polygamy, right? So you have other camps that have been teaching, I believe it's the IUIC, if I'm not mistaken, because the elder apostles were reacting to um, uh, um, I guess, a video that they made and saying that if a man has another wife that doesn't belong to anybody, it's also considered so-called cheating, right? So I kind of just wanted to touch on this, just some example within the scriptures in regards to men who had more than one wife. And Lord's will is always, this would be edifying, right? So I typed it into ChatGPT and it says polygamy is a form of polygamy where a man has multiple wives. It says simultaneously and has been practiced, excuse me, historically in many cultures and still exists in various parts of the world today. While it is a controversial, often debated form of ethical, legal, and gender equality perspectives, and there is no such thing as gender equality because the man is really the woman's head, right? There's a hierarchy, right? So it says some proponents and researchers have identified potential benefits of polygamy, and particularly within some specific cultural, economic, and social context, right? So I want to read the first one here, and I want to get to the first example, right? So I just bear with me, and I sincerely pray as always that this lesson is edifying, right? So one of the benefits here, it says social and economic stability in some cultures. It says support for widows and single women. In some societies, polygamy also allows women, especially women, it says widows, divorcees, and those unable to marry, to be economically and socially supported. It says expansion of family labor. More wives mean a larger workforce for agriculture or family businesses, especially in rural and subsistence economies. Pooling of resources. Larger families can pool labor, childcare, and income, that which may help in managing large households or estates, right? So this was a very common practice within our culture. Even the Israelites, just to go slightly off topic, the Israelites in Western Africa were very well known for doing this. And I remember reading, I was doing some research also in regards to the so-called Tainos. They also did the same thing, and I believe the head was also known as, they were called caciques, and they also practiced the same thing, right? So let me go to my first example, and then we can essentially go back and forth, right? So this is Genesis chapter 30, verse 1, and it says, and when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, give me children, or lest I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and said, am I in the Most High's stead, who hath withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? And she said, behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her. She shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her, right? So this was a very, common thing, So in this situation, Rachel, she wasn't essentially, she wasn't shelling out the dough, right? But so the handmaid stepped in and essentially was able to serve as, I don't want to say a surrogate, but basically also help to bring forth more children. This is where you get the what we know as the 12 sons of Jacob, and Jacob's name was changed to Israel, right? So this is that beginning of where you get these different sons, right? So it mentioned here expansion of family labor, so more wives can have a larger workforce for agriculture or family businesses in a rural or a subsistence economies, right? So there was essentially an economic reason. And even today, if you really think about it practically, if a man actually practiced that, and the wives were essentially in unison, they were all like, say for example, if a man, you're a man and you have two wives and you're all in unison, you can essentially pool resources together a lot quicker, a lot more efficiently, because in this society, right, things are, so expensive now, to the point where, if you have more hands on deck, it actually makes the transition, actually makes earning an income a lot smoothly, right? Because people, we're not living no longer in the days when, one income would suffice to take care of a wife, two or three children, and a dog or whatever, right? We don't live in those days anymore. But the economy is more, things are more affordable, right? So polygamy, if you really think about it, would serve as a benefit, towards the society. However, what we have in the society basically is a lot of propaganda, a lot of romance, you know, a lot of this feminism BS, where the women are pedestalized, and this idea and strong belief of monogamy is permeated within the people, amongst the people of the nation, amongst the people in this society, right? So they're not going to be very, very chuffed about the idea. But the scriptures talk about seeking the old paths, and this is the way we used to live, right? This would be a very, very efficient benefit, to actually being able to, like, say for example, you're a man and you want to have your own space, and like, those that is a very, very useful tactic into doing so, right? Because you're in cohesion. There's a sense of cohesion, right? Essentially it is a method, right? So the man is able to give his wives the instructions to be able to gather up resources a lot more efficiently, right? And even further, if you take it a step further, it helps to chop up the responsibility on the wife's end, right? So they're not super overburdened by other responsibilities, right? Especially a lot of these responsibilities that this world places on them, going on. You know what I'm saying? But this is just a benefit. So going down here, where was I? Oh, here's this. This is a very good one too. Another benefit here. It says a higher reproductive success. So it says from an evolutionary standpoint, it says some argue that polygamy allows successful males to pass on their genes more widely, increasing reproductive success. It can increase the overall number of offspring in populations where women significantly outnumber men, right? And this is what exactly is happening in this society, because what you have now is a lot of women, they don't have, they're not, this feminism propaganda is not leading them to actually end up in successful marriages. Because one of the things, the consequences of feminism what a lot of our women don't understand, and women in general in the West here don't understand, is that it has never taught you to be an actual woman, right? It's just giving you the mindset of how to actually be a man. You're just basically being a man in a woman's body. That's all you're doing, because it teaches you to go to school, get an education, get a high paying job, and so on and so forth. It never taught you how to cook. It never taught you how to, you know, care for your husband. It never taught you how to be an emotional support. It never taught you how to, you know, grind a meal, grind down grains. That was one of the things that women used to do in the agricultural agrarian times, when the scriptures talk about how the grinding shall cease, right? That grinding was an activity that was done by women. Essentially they would take the grains, and then they would grind them. They would grind them into, making that flour, and that flour will be used to make bread, right? That is a very, very useful skill. And a lot of these home economic skills are not done today. So this feminism, again, has not done our women, or women in general, any benefit at all. It is simply, like the point I was making earlier, it is simply taught you to just be a man in a woman's body, right? Think like how a man thinks, right? It doesn't make you more attractive to have a more 9 to 5 career. Those things are not attractive to a man, because that's what a man would have to do to, not to say to go to school, but he would have to acquire physical, financial substance, right? So I recently had just read a biological perspective in regards to offspring, right? So I just wanted to read this quick precept here in regards to offspring. And it says, this is going into the judge Gideon. This is Judges chapter 8, verse 30. And it says, and Gideon had 70 sons of his body begotten, for he had many wives. So 70, that's 60 plus 10 is 70. So 70 sons, right? So it ensures your offspring is multiplied, right? And if you think about it, one of the things that would benefit society as a whole is the fact that this concept of polygamy, because then you set up a system where the men are able to have more than one wife, and then each of those wives are able to bring forth different a certain different amounts of children, right? So your offspring, kind of like how, I'll just use what's this guy's name? Nick Cannon. I think he has like 13. I want to say it's like 11. I forgot how much. It's a lot of different wives he has though. Anyways, the point is that his seed he replicated himself about, let's say if it's 10, like 10 different times, right? As opposed to in this society, it's mostly, when you go with the concept of monogamy, it's limiting your ability to multiply and duplicate yourself, because that's what a man really wants to do, is to be able to duplicate his seed over and over and over again, to ensure and maintain and continue the lineage. This is about lineage. This is about progeny. This is about continuing the seed. This is about continuing the family line. This is about continuing the bloodline, right? And that was one of the heaviest things that there was a show I used to watch, called Game of Thrones. It was always about the importance of a bloodline, continuing the bloodline, making sure that you have sons, and making sure those sons are able to duplicate and have different wives, and be able to continue on the family line, right? Continue on that name, right? But this is just the way Esau has turned things upside down. In this society, it's so messed up, because it essentially what it's doing is castrating the Israelite man in different forms, right? This is just one form. Monogamy is just one form, through the different avenues through the Catholic Church, so-called sex before marriage and all this kind of stuff. And you're castrated in other ways, through the food that you eat, the water that you drink, the programming that you subscribe to. So your essence, or even for example, like Planned Parenthood, right? The essence of manhood and continuing the bloodline is very, very it's very, very castrated, socially castrated, chemically castrated in the societies, right? It's not just essentially you're being intact on every side, right? And this is one of the benefits of when if you actually implement the ways of the Heavenly Father has set up, this would continue the line, and that way each woman gets their children, right? Right. But what do we have in the society? You have men so far ostracized and don't want to marry women, and the women don't want to marry the men, and they're so divided and far apart. Now you have AI girlfriends, and now you have you have sex dolls, and you have you have so much where the scriptures talk about how an unwise king destroyeth his people. This is the mindset of Esau, is to destroy the people and to destroy that bloodline, right? But this is just an example, right? So let me go to, I did say 3 examples. This is one of them, but this isn't one of them, but this also works. Okay. Let's see. Let's get another example. Okay, this is 1 Samuel chapter 27, verse 3, and it says, "And David dwelt in Achish at Gath, he and his men, every man and his household, even David and his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's wife," right? So when you go back in the story, Nabal had, the Lord took Nabal out, right? She was essentially, Abigail was married to him first, right? I'm sorry, married to her first, and then, David, needed Nabal's help, and Nabal kind of fanned his hand, and Abigail intervened. Long story short, the Lord took Nabal out, and, David was able to essentially marry Abigail, right? Because, Nabal had died at that point, right? But the point really here is to show another example. This was something that was very, very common within our culture. It says, verse 3, and it says, "In communities where polygamy is a religious and cultural norm," it says, "practicing it is seen as a way to fulfill religious duties and traditions. It can enhance a social status and culture where polygamy is a sign of wealth or prestige," and that's true. It adds, because it's a lot more than just, like, in this world. It's seen as, especially in the West, I'm kind of more speaking of. In the West, it's seen as something more of a fantasy. It's seen more, when people think of it, people see it more as a sexual fantasy, to be able to, have more than one wife, and to kind of bed them at the same time or whatever, and all this kind of nonsense, right? That's how, let me get a scripture on that. Hold on. So, what was that? 1 Corinthians 3. This is 1 Corinthians 3, verse 19, and it says, "For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with the Most High, for it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness." Right? And I'm reading this to show that, that's the way it is seen in this society. People are not seeing it as a mechanism, to see it as an essential tool, part of culture, to be able to continuing on the family line, to be able to continue the legacy, continuing the bloodline, continuing your progeny, right? When our people don't think about, these things. They don't think about the welfare as your nation as a whole. They're not in the mindset of nation building. This is how you actually build nations, right? This is very, very, important. Like, you had Jacob, he begat, his 12 sons, right? And a company of nations. Like a lot, like Ephraim alone is a a nation, a nation of themselves, if you think about it, right? Because they're really, really like to be fruitful, man, right? And that was one of our commandments. We were to be fruitful and multiply, right? And if you think about it, also, this is one of the ways that would correct one of the problems in this society, if you think about it. Because what is the problem that's going on in these Western nations today? One of the biggest problems is the declining birth rates. You have these heathens, and going back to the precept I read earlier, the wisdom of this world is foolish. One child policy in China is foolish. You know, monogamy, technically, it's foolish. This is not a mindset to actually be able to replenish the population. So now you have an aging baby boomer population where a lot of them are getting old. They're they're in that mindset where, okay, they want to retire, and now you have things that are so expensive when the younger generations, they find it so expensive and they are not able to actually have families anymore. This kingdom is very, very anti-life. It's very, very dull. It's very, very base. When people think about, if you have more than one wife, they think of it as something. Their minds are so base where they just merely think of polygamy as just a mere sexual fantasy for the man. They're not in the mindset of actually trying to maintain the welfare of their family, because what makes a family is important to the building of a clan, and a clan makes up the a tribe, and the tribes make up a nation, right? This is an important tool to the custom to maintaining and continuing on the welfare of your nation. But our people they're not in the mindset of what's the word I'm looking for, of royalty. They're not in the mindset of being you're basically in the mindset of a peasant, because this is what Esau does. Monogamy. The scriptures say that one people shall be stronger than the other. We are stronger because we're a lot more capable, and Esau knows this. They know this. This is no I don't want to say an accident. They understand that we're stronger. They understand that we're able to multiply, and we're a lot more fruitful and a lot stronger. As a matter of fact, they used to use sex slaves back in the time of slavery, right? They used to have slaves that were just what they would call breeding slaves. So because they know the strength of you Israelites, right? But you Israelites, you don't have the mindset of actually building, and caring about the welfare of the nation, right? So, and a lot of our women subscribe to that monogamy, life. That is the world friendly mindset, you know. So, what I pretty much, that is three examples. That is Gideon, David, Gideon, and Jacob, right? There are others, King Solomon, you had Abraham, right? I just wanted to pick three different examples to show that, polygamy is something that was an ancient custom that we did practice, right? You're not wicked, a man isn't wicked if he has, a second wife, right? Let me just get two more, and I guess I'll close there. This is Exodus chapter 21 verse 10, and it says, if he take him another wife for food raiment, and her duty of marriage, shall he not diminish, right? So it's very within the man's parameters to take on another wife. Now, another caveat I will say to this also, hold on, and I'll end off the lesson with this here. It's much within the man's parameters to do those, take on more than one wife, right? But also keep in mind your situation, and keep in mind also the times we're living in, right? That's another part, and I'll end off with that last part too, because you don't want to do something that's lawful, but it still is, it acts as a burden to your situation. So say for example, if you were, you were job hunting and you were looking for a job, and you kind of wanted to find your own place. In that situation, having more than one wife would not be very, very advantageous, right? You would want to get yourself to, in a space where you're a little bit more well established, right? You want to be in a space where you're still able to manage those particular responsibilities, right? So I'll end off with this last precept here. This is Ecclesiastes 7, verse 16, and it says, "Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Why shouldest thou destroy thyself?" Right? And if you're in a situation like that, then it's not really the best idea to, start multiplying wise, right? Because remember, we're still in captivity, we're subject to payments, and then if you look at your own personal situation, all right, if the shoe fits, wear it. You may not be in a situation where it's very, very advantageous to do that at the moment, right? So needless to say, it's not wicked. Your man is well in his right to have more than one wife, but understand and just be mindful of your situation also, right? It might be a hindrance, a hinder, I suppose you can say, to your situation, right? To the point where might lead you to destroying yourself. You don't want to do that, right? So just be mindful. Things are lawful, but not everything is expedient, as Paul said, right? So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to go into a little bit of the ins and outs of polygamy. There's some other examples here in ChatGPT. It says division of domestic labor. It says reduce pressure on marriage markets. It says care and companionship in old age. It says that's pretty much it. Because there's always a plethora of different benefits, but society doesn't outline the benefits, and it doesn't outline the understanding of what it can do. Because if you actually were to implement, like I was saying earlier, this custom here, this custom would fix a lot of these nations declining birth rates, right? So, but anyways, Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.